Number 5. The Juarez Cartel. They used to fly tons of cocaine above radar detection. Now they fight tooth and nail for control of a single city. Juarez, a name that once meant billions, now it means bodies, betrayals, and the bloodiest turf war in Mexico's history. If you stick with me, I'll show you how a cartel born from the skies became one of the most dangerous forces on the ground. The Juarez cartel's story starts with one man, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, famously nicknamed El Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies. Why that name? Because Amado didn't traffic drugs like the others. He bought entire fleets of Boeing 727 jets, hollowed them out, and filled them with cocaine. He bypassed border patrols by flying over them, literally. He made so much money that Forbes once estimated his net worth to be over $25 billion at his peak. But he had a problem. Everyone wanted him dead, or in chains. So Amado did something wild. He checked into a private hospital in Mexico City and tried to surgically change his face. The plan? Erase his identity and disappear forever. But during surgery, something went wrong. Or did it? Officially, Amado died on the operating table in 1997 due to a reaction to anesthesia. But here's the twist. The two doctors who performed the operation found dead, encased in cement a few weeks later. Some say Amado faked his death and vanished. Others believe he was assassinated on that table. Either way, chaos followed. With Amado gone, leadership fell to his brother Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, who wasn't quite as brilliant, but just as ruthless. The Juarez cartel shifted gears. Instead of dominating with innovation, they turned to war against Sinaloa, their former partners. Why? Because El Chapo Guzman, once an ally, allegedly betrayed them by ordering a high-level hit on one of their own. That sparked a years-long turf war that left thousands dead in Ciudad Juarez. Between 2008 and 2012, Juarez was labeled the murder capital of the world. Bodies piled up daily, sometimes in groups, sometimes with messages pinned to their chests, and still, the cartel held on. They've been declared defunct more than once, but the truth is, they never left. Today, the Juarez cartel maintains control over key smuggling routes through El Paso, which happens to be the busiest land port in the entire US. The city may look calm on the surface, but beneath, a silent war simmers between Juarez, CJ&G, and Sinaloa. One wrong move could ignite it again. And before we move on, here's something that might blow your mind. At its peak, the cartel allegedly made $200 million per week. That's more than some Fortune 500 companies make in a year. Number 4. The Gulf Cartel. They didn't just smuggle, they militarized. Before cartels had armies, before they filmed executions, one group rewrote the rulebook on organized terror. And that's exactly what I'll reveal in a moment. The Gulf Cartel is one of the oldest criminal organizations in Mexico. It began in the 1930s, not with cocaine, but with booze. During US Prohibition, they smuggled alcohol across the border to thirsty Americans with deep pockets. Back then, they were quiet. By the 80s, they had evolved. And by the late 90s, they turned into something terrifying. Because in 1997, the Gulf Cartel did something no one else dared. They recruited former Mexican special forces. The group they formed was called Los Zetas. They weren't street thugs. They were elite soldiers, trained in counterinsurgency, sniping, explosives, and torture. And now they were working for drug lords. Imagine a cartel that operates like a military unit, coordinated ambushes, assassinations with military-grade weapons, and complete psychological warfare. That's what the Gulf Cartel unleashed on Mexico. Los Zetas quickly became the most feared enforcers in the country. They didn't just eliminate rivals, they'd leave bodies hanging from bridges, skinned faces, and messages written in blood. It worked. For a while, the Gulf Cartel controlled the entire northeast of Mexico, especially Tamaulipas, which bordered Brownsville, Texas, a key smuggling point into the US. Their influence spread over 20 states, but power corrupts, and with Los Zetas growing stronger, tensions rose. By 2010, everything snapped. The Zetas broke away and declared themselves an independent cartel. What followed was a brutal war between creator and creation. The Gulf Cartel, weakened but defiant, aligned with rivals just to survive, including their once hated enemy, Sinaloa. Their common goal? Wipe out the Zetas. And here's where things get insane. Los Zetas didn't stop at drugs. They expanded into oil theft, illegal mining, extortion, and even piracy of DVDs. Yes, actual movies. At one point, they were profiting from over 15 criminal enterprises. The Gulf Cartel, meanwhile, tried to return to basics, trafficking, but the damage was done. Leadership arrests, internal betrayals, and shrinking territory have taken a toll. Yet they still exist, and the DEA continues to list them among the top 5 threats to US national security. Why? Because Tamaulipas is too strategic to give up. Because the remnants of the Gulf Cartel are deeply embedded in ports, roads, and even local governments. And because, even today, their original tactics still echo across the underworld. Here's a shocker before we move on. One of the original Zeta members was trained in the US by American forces before becoming a cartel warlord. But we're far from done. Number 3. Los Zetas. They weren't born in the streets, they were trained by the military and then sold their souls to the drug war. What started as bodyguards for one cartel became the most feared death squad in Latin America. And what happened next? You're about to find out. Los Zetas didn't start small. They were born big, brutal, and highly organized. Their roots trace back to 1997 when Arturo Guzman de Sena, a former Mexican army lieutenant and special forces operative, switched sides. He brought 30 elite soldiers with him, men trained to kill quickly, quietly, and without hesitation. They weren't gangsters playing soldier, they were soldiers playing gangster. Their first mission? Serve as the muscle for the Gulf Cartel. But that didn't last, because Los Zetas had ambition, and ambition in the world of cartels comes soaked in blood. They quickly rose from enforcers to full-blown traffickers, running operations across Mexico, Guatemala, and even parts of Texas. But what made them infamous wasn't just their tactics, it was their philosophy. They believed fear was more powerful than loyalty, so they used it relentlessly. We're talking public executions, mass graves, and messages carved into corpses. One town discovered 72 migrants slaughtered in a warehouse. Why? They refused to work as drug mules. Los Zetas also pioneered something new in cartel warfare: media terror. They left notes on bodies, uploaded videos of interrogations, and flooded local news stations with threats. They weren't just fighting other cartels, they were fighting for psychological dominance. And it worked. At their peak in 2012, Los Zetas controlled more territory in Mexico than any other group, nearly a third of the country. But that kind of brutality creates enemies, fast. All at once, they were battling the Mexican military, the Gulf Cartel, their former allies, the rising CJNG, who literally branded themselves Zeta killers, and even civilians who formed self-defense militias to fight back. Then came the cracks. Top leaders were arrested or killed. Internal factions splintered off, forming even more deadly mini-cartels. One ex-Zeta commander even turned informant and revealed that some of their tactics were inspired by ISIS propaganda. Yeah, you heard that right. But even now, Los Zetas aren't gone. What's left operates under names like the Northeast Cartel, still active, still violent. They're no longer unified, but they're still everywhere. And every time they get cornered, they mutate into something else. Here's what most people don't know. They once hijacked an entire prison, locked the guards inside, and freed over 130 inmates, many of them assassins. That's not a story, that's history. Number 2, CJNG. They promised to clean up Mexico. Then they dumped 35 bodies in broad daylight, right next to a shopping mall. What turned a small breakaway faction into the fastest growing criminal empire in the Western Hemisphere? That's what I'll show you right now. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, wasn't supposed to be this powerful. Back in 2010, they were just a splinter group, born from chaos after the death of a Sinaloa meth kingpin named El Nacho Coronel. At first, they called themselves Los Mata Zetas, the Zeta Killers. Their message was clear: we are against kidnapping, against extortion, and we want to clean Mexico. Sounds noble, until you see what they did next. In Veracruz, they left 35 bodies, naked, beaten, tossed from trucks during rush hour. And with them, a chilling note: this is what happens to Zetas. We're coming for all of you. They didn't hide in the shadows. They declared war on Zetas, on rival cartels, on the government. Their leader? Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, aka El Mencho, a former cop turned narco mastermind. And he's a ghost. No confirmed pictures, no fingerprints, just whispers, and a $10 million reward on his head, making him America's most wanted drug lord. So how did CJNG explode so fast? They mastered meth. While others focused on cocaine and weed, CJNG tapped into international supply chains, importing precursors from China and India, setting up massive super labs, and pushing synthetic drugs into over 50 countries. They're not just a Mexican cartel, they're a global logistics operation. By 2015, CJNG had expanded into over 23 Mexican states. That's more territory than any cartel in history at that point. But with growth came blood. They shot down a Mexican military helicopter in 2015. Yes, a helicopter, killing 9 soldiers. They've bombed convoys, ambushed Marines, and set up roadblocks using stolen military gear. And yet, despite hundreds of arrests, asset seizures, and elite manhunts, El Mencho remains free. Why? Because CJNG doesn't depend on one leader. They're decentralized. Their top lieutenants run cells with military discipline and financial precision. They even launched their own propaganda campaigns, handing out food, paying for schools, and calling themselves protectors of the people. But it's a lie wrapped in bullets, because their reach is growing fast, and it's far from over. Here's a jaw-dropper. CJNG once kidnapped 2 of El Chapo's sons, held them for days, and then released them, but because the message had already been sent. Now imagine what they'll do next, and that leads us to the final name on the list, the cartel that started it all, the one still pulling strings, even with its king behind bars. You've heard the name, but you don't know the whole story, because Sinaloa isn't a cartel, it's an empire. Number 1. The Sinaloa Cartel. They built tunnels under the US border with rails, lights, and ventilation. They made billions in the shadows, and even prison couldn't stop them. This is the story of how the Sinaloa Cartel became the most powerful drug trafficking network the world has ever seen, and why it's still far from over. You can't talk about drug cartels without mentioning El Chapo Guzman, but the Sinaloa Cartel isn't about one man. It's a machine, a multinational empire. And it all began in the mountains of Sinaloa, Mexico, a region so perfect for growing opium and cannabis, it's been called the cradle of Mexican drug trafficking. Back in the 1980s, El Chapo was a low-ranking trafficker in the Guadalajara cartel, which collapsed after the murder of DEA agent Kiki Camarena. When the bosses were arrested, the territories were split. Sinaloa went to Chapo and his close allies. But unlike others, El Chapo didn't wait for power, he built it, and he started with tunnels. While other cartels moved product through trucks and couriers, El Chapo dug underground highways, complete with lighting, air systems, even motorized rail cars. They went from warehouses in Tijuana straight under the US border into San Diego. Authorities once called it the Disneyland of drug smuggling. But Sinaloa didn't just smuggle, they expanded, they scaled, and they industrialized the drug trade. They moved into cocaine, marijuana, heroin, and then meth. In the early 2000s, Sinaloa was supplying over half of all illegal drugs entering the US, and they weren't quiet about it. Sinaloa traffickers lived like kings. Private zoos, gold-plated guns, armored SUVs. They even filmed recruitment videos like an army. But the real danger wasn't their violence, it was their control. Sinaloa embedded itself in governments, police forces, and even media outlets. A leaked document once revealed they had over 3,000 corrupt officials on their payroll, just in Mexico. Then came the legend of El Chapo. He escaped from prison, not once, but twice. First in 2001 by hiding in a laundry cart, then again in 2015 through a mile-long tunnel that opened into his prison shower. That tunnel? It took over a year to build, cost millions, and even had a motorbike on rails. Eventually, in 2016, he was caught again, extradited to the US, convicted, and sentenced to life plus 30 years. And here's the twist. The Sinaloa cartel didn't collapse. Instead, it split into factions. Los Chapitos, led by El Chapo's sons, El Mayo Zambada, the quiet power broker who's never been arrested, and El Chapo's brother, Aureliano Guzman. These internal battles are reshaping the cartel, and Mexico. Today, Sinaloa still controls major smuggling routes, and despite constant attacks from rivals like CJNG, they remain the most sophisticated, well-connected, and far-reaching cartel in history. Here's the part that chills people. In 2022 alone, the US seized enough fentanyl from Sinaloa-linked groups to kill every American, twice. That's the legacy of Sinaloa. Not just crime, but global influence. And the war? It's not ending. It's evolving. Because as one leader falls, 3 more rise. If this shocked you, there's more coming. Hit subscribe, drop a comment on the craziest cartel story you heard today, and don't forget, every empire falls, but some fight to the end. The next war is already being planned.